The air was thick with the weight of the impending semester. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the campus as the new intake of students flooded the university grounds. The excitement was palpable, the kind of energy you only feel when you're about to start something new. I arrived early, ready to meet the new batch of students. As the assistant professor of psychology, it was my job to ease them into the rigors of academic life. But something felt off about this intake. It wasn't the students themselves. They were eager, curious, like any group of first years. It was the atmosphere. The campus had this weight, this strange heaviness that hung over it. The older building seemed to groan with the weight of history, the ancient stone walls stretching skyward like dark sentinels watching the crowd below. The trees in the quad, with their twisted, gnarled branches, seemed to claw at the sky in protest. I shook it off as I led the new students into the lecture hall. It was time to get to work. A fresh semester, a new start. Or so I thought. As I set up for the first lecture, something caught my eye, a flicker of movement just outside the window. A student, or maybe a figure, moving too quickly to be identified, darted behind the old oak tree by the building. My mind immediately jumped to conclusions, just one of the students from a previous year, probably fooling around. But there was no one there when I looked again. I tried to shake the unease, but as I glanced at the clock, I noticed it was running a bit too fast. My fingers brushed the face of the clock, and I felt an unsettling chill run up my spine. The classroom had grown suddenly cold, colder than it should have been for the middle of September. The students began to trickle in, their chatter muffled as I watched them settle into their seats. My gaze drifted back to the window, and this time, I saw it. A shadow, standing behind the tree. This time, it didn't move. I told myself it was a trick of the light, but I couldn't help the shiver that ran down my back. The next morning, it was worse. The students I had spoken to the day before seemed different. I couldn't place it at first, but there was something unsettling about the way they spoke, the way they looked at me. Hollow. Empty. As if they were there physically, but not mentally. I tried to ignore it, but then things started to go missing. Small things at first, pens, notebooks, a textbook that disappeared off my desk. I thought perhaps a student had taken them by mistake, but this wasn't normal. This was deliberate. Then, one of my colleagues, Professor Matthews, went missing. He'd been here for years, always so punctual, so reliable. He hadn't shown up for his 8 a.m. lecture. At first, it seemed like an accident. But when his office was found locked, and the lights flickered intermittently inside, I knew something was wrong. That's when I started to hear the whispers. It began late one night. I was in my office, grading papers, when I heard it, soft at first, like the rustling of papers or the faintest murmur of voices from the next room. I chalked it up to the building settling or the wind rattling the windows, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. It was as if someone was speaking just outside my door, though no one was there. I crept to the door and opened it, peering into the dark hallway. Empty. I returned to my desk, my heart pounding in my chest. Then the whispers began again, louder this time. Almost clear. They were calling my name. Softly at first, but the longer I listened, the clearer it became. Professor, help us. I froze. That voice, it wasn't a student. It was someone else. I grabbed my coat and hurried out of the office, but when I reached the hallway, everything was silent again. No one was around. It felt as though the building itself was holding its breath. The next few days were a blur of panic. Several students had gone missing, including some from the new intake. No one seemed to have seen them leave, and their dorm rooms were locked. It was like they had vanished into thin air. I started to investigate. Something wasn't adding up. The new students had only been here for a few days, but they seemed to be at the center of it all. Every time I questioned them, their answers were vague. They were all too calm, too, composed. It was as if they knew something that I didn't. Then, one evening, I made a horrifying discovery. I was in the library, sorting through old records of previous student intakes, when I found a forgotten file on the new intake. The file was old, very old, though it appeared to have been added to recently. The names on the list of students matched the ones who had gone missing. And as I skimmed through the file, I found something even more chilling. The same thing had happened years ago. A new intake, students going missing, and faculty members disappearing without a trace. The file ended abruptly with a note scrawled in red ink: "They're not who they say they are. Be careful. They're watching." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Who were they? What were they? I had to know more, so I dug deeper into the history of the school. What I uncovered made my blood run cold. This university was built on an ancient burial ground. Generations ago, before the campus was even constructed, it was said to be home to a ritualistic cult. The cult had worshipped something ancient, something dark. And every few decades, a new intake would be brought in to renew the ritual. It seemed that the tradition had never stopped. The new students, they weren't students at all. They were something else. They had been waiting for the right moment to make their move. To disappear. To feed. I was no longer alone in the university. As I walked through the campus that night, I saw them. The students. They weren't just standing around, they were watching me. Their hollow eyes followed every step I took. I could feel their presence in every corner, in every shadow. There was no escape. Suddenly, one of them spoke. "It's time," the student whispered. Before I could react, the ground beneath me shook. The air turned cold, and the whispers grew into a deafening roar. I was surrounded. The walls of the university seemed to close in on me, and I could hear the distant, haunting sounds of chanting, growing louder, coming from all directions. I turned to run, but my legs betrayed me. I fell to the ground, and the last thing I saw before the darkness took me was the face of one of the students, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. And then, nothing. When I woke up, I was no longer in the university. I was standing in front of the campus, staring at the building as if I had never seen it before. The sun was rising, and everything seemed normal. But when I glanced at the ground, I saw something that made my stomach churn: a name, written in the dirt at my feet. It was mine. And it wasn't just a name. It was my death date. The students had won. And I was just another piece in their eternal game.